The best communication training I've ever received actually didn't come in a classroom and wasn't even a book. It was the experience of living with Tibetan monks who didn't speak any English and barely even had electricity. Hi, I'm Richard Newman. I've been studying communication for over 30 years, and I'll be sharing with you on this channel some of the best things that I've learned to help you succeed in critical situations. It was back in 1995, and to take you back to that moment, I was leaving school. My friends had all gone off to university, and I was supposed to go to university as well. But I just suddenly had this compelling urge thinking, I've had a good life. I want to give back to the world. And I also really want to understand communication because I had come from this upbringing of not understanding communication and being frustrated around it and wanting to figure out who I am, but give something back to the world. And so I found this opportunity to go and live in this Tibetan monastery in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I thought this would be an extraordinary adventure. And so there I was, 18 years old. This is before the age of Wi-Fi and mobile phones. And I'd never been away from home without my parents, at least not overseas. Never boarded a flight without my family. And so I took off to India. I landed in Delhi. I was there for a couple of days trying to figure out where I was going. I then took this 36-hour train journey across India, found a jeep that would take me up into the foothills, which I was then in for 4 hours, going past sort of monkeys on the side of the road, up into the mist, and going up above the clouds, and eventually arriving at this monastery with these monks who... these are Tibetan monks who were living in exile, and they wanted to learn English because they wanted to connect with the outside world and gain sponsorship to support their way of life. And there I was thinking naively, well, this is going to be straightforward. I've seen Good Morning Vietnam, where Robin Williams was just decided, I'm going to be a teacher for the day. And he goes in the class and he's teaching stuff. And I thought, I've seen that. I know what I'm doing. And so I went in there, and they led me to their kitchen, where I realized that they didn't have like a classroom environment. They didn't have a blackboard. They just had a kitchen, and they sat me down and they gave me a cup of Tibetan tea. In fact, there was a whole flask sitting in front of me of Tibetan tea, which for context is about a third tea, a third butter, and a third salt. And they poured this out. And I started trying to speak to them, and I thought, okay, you don't speak any English at all. And meanwhile, I was politely trying to drink their tea, thinking, this is the most disgusting liquid I've ever put in my mouth. And I'm supposed to be living with you for 6 months. And, they didn't have any connection with the outside world. They only got hot running water while I was at the monastery. They didn't have it before that. And I was thinking, how on earth am I going to connect with them just to get the lessons moving and to teach them anything valuable? All of my ideas had gone out the window. And eventually we sort of worked out, okay, we're going to have these lessons at 6 o'clock in the evening. We'd figured out by just, getting a clock out and sort of pointing to the right time, confirming that. They would go out through the day to do prayers in the town. They'd come back. And then when the sun was setting, they would sit there and we'd sort of light candles, and I would do these lessons for them. And again, anything that I thought would be useful for them just sort of disappeared early days. And I had to figure out, how do I actually communicate with someone where I don't know their language, they don't know mine? What am I going to teach them that is useful? And so I started to teach them through body language and tone of voice. And so I realized very quickly that if I said something and I didn't look physically or sound vocally like I was saying that word, it was lost on them. So if I said the word excited, if I didn't look excited or sound excited, I could be saying the word pineapple. They'd have absolutely no idea what I was doing. And I had to build out all of my lessons being 100% congruent in every way. And so as an example of this, at one point we got a bit more advanced and I was teaching them prepositions. So how do you teach prepositions to people who you don't have a shared language with? And so I taught them this thing where it goes, if I can remember it, this was 30 years ago, so this is testing me. But this went up, down, into, onto, over, under, out, in front, behind, next to, opposite, round and roundabout. And so I would get them to do that physically to get to the point where they understood it. And then, eventually they could use those words without needing to do the gestures at the same time. But it was things like that I was doing, very physical, interactive way of teaching them. And when I was teaching them the weather, I had to take on the emotion, the expression, the gestures that might convey the types of weather that I teach them about, sun and rain and foggy, and how they would say those things. And it was this extraordinary experience. But beyond all of that, the piece that was really the biggest communication lesson that I got from them was how much we understood each other beyond the words. So sometimes we would just sit over a cup of tea, and eventually they started making me Indian tea because they realized I didn't like the Tibetan tea. I loved Indian tea, which was very much more sort of regular milk and sugar and a lot of sugar. And so we just sort of sit there and have conversations in their kitchen where I'd speak in English and they'd speak in Tibetan or Nepali, and then we just sort of sit and look at each other and realize there was an understanding that we had, a sense of who the other person was just by being present, by being still. And I thought, wow, there's something really in this, that we rely on words so much for communication. But if you just put them to one side for a minute and communicate entirely non-verbally, or even just sit in your presence being with their presence, there's so much that you can convey and understand about that human being. And that's where my journey started, on really wanting to work on my energy, my presence. Who am I going to be? And I remember years and years later, I was at a workshop. I was learning about negotiation skills. And this lady who was hosting it, she said, "My best feedback for you, Richard, is you have an amazing climate." And I said, "I don't know what that means." She said, "It's like a South African way that we explain that somebody's got a nice energy to be around them. And that's what you have even at the start of these negotiations that we were practicing." And it made me think back to being with the monks, where I thought that's what they had. They had this amazing climate. You would sit with them and just feel better about existing. I've got loads of pictures of them from the monastery, from the little old camera that I had before the age of digital photography, where in every picture they have these massive beaming smiles. And sometimes I look at those pictures and think, you didn't have hot running water, you didn't have electricity, you didn't have a warm bed, you had 2 changes of clothes. They didn't have anything that we have today, like mobile phones or stereo systems or anything, or a TV even to enjoy. And yet they were just abundantly happy in life, and you could feel it without them saying a word. And so when I work with clients on this today around presence, I'm always drawn back to that sense of you need to be able to make an impact just by being. Right, it's not even about walking through the room or saying the right thing. You need to get back to that state of just being happy within yourself and sending out a positive energy to the people around you. And if you can do that, everything else from communication is going to move from there. If you can't do that, everything else will just tumble down like a pile of Jenga, or if the base isn't going to be solid. So that, I think, was the biggest piece that I took away from being with all of them, is that sense of human connection that we all have, completely beyond the use of words. Hey, I'm Richard Newman. I've been studying communication for over 30 years. I've written a couple of books on this and published my own unique research on behavioral science. And if that's your kind of thing, if you love body language, communication, storytelling, then do follow, subscribe, and I'd love to hear what you think about this video so we can keep on making great content for you.